All right, so Johnny Tremain by Esther Forbes, illustrated by Lynd Ward, and published by Houghton Mifflin Harcourt. Chapter 7, Section 2. So Section 1 is about paying the fiddler's bill and how difficult conditions are in Boston because the soldiers are there. Rab got hit in the head with a sword, and those things are heavy, for reaching out to touch and show Johnny what the nice guns were like, but the soldiers are watching them very closely. Section 2. Oh, and Johnny is starting to ride as an express rider and carry messages because he knows the area and because the British riders can't go out alone because they would get mugged by the locals. So Johnny is riding and he's kind of a spy. Section 2. Now Johnny no longer kept half the money he and Goblin earned carrying letters. He charged the British officers such a figure, and they never complained. He was bringing in a considerable sum, and he gave it all to Aunt Lauren to buy food for her family, of which he was one. At first she wouldn't take it. Then she cried and kissed him on the little peak of hair that turned down upon his forehead, and did take it. No gallows was set up to hang rebels. General Gage was doing his best to make friends with the people of Boston. He did not stop the flood of treasonable oratory which poured forth from men like Warren and Quincy. Oratory is things that come from your mouth, like the treasonable things that they're talking about all the time. He did not prohibit the publication of such inflammatory presses as the Observer. The Whigs had their say. The papers were allowed to print outrageous things about himself and his troops. He was not brilliant, but he was no tyrant. In time, he confidently expected all the trouble would smooth out by itself, if only the soldiers and the inhabitants did not get to quarreling. Nor did Boston starve. From one end of the Atlantic seaboard to the other, towns and even villages sent great shipments of food, rice from South Carolina or quintals of fish from Marblehead, money even from London, for there was much sympathy in England for Boston. Flour, corn, beef, sheep, all day were passing through the town gates upon the neck in carts and wagons. This was the only road connecting Boston with the mainland. Formerly, almost everything she used came to her on her hundreds of famous ships. Now the ships were lying like dead birds along her wharves. So July was ending. Johnny had not seen Priscilla Lapham for 3 weeks. His schedule was now so much upset he never did know when he would be in North Square on a Thursday. And every Sunday of late he had gone out to Lexington to watch the Minutemen drilling, a little secretly behind Grandsire Silsby's great barn. It might be Sabbath-breaking, but these men were so sure they were doing God's will in preparing to resist tyranny, they did not care. Johnny could only stand and watch. True enough, there were boys no older than he drilling there, but his crippled hand made it impossible for him to pull a trigger. This incapacity fretted him badly, and he would sometimes take it out on Rab. The militia troops didn't look like much. They had funny-looking guns. They were funny-looking men. And Rab let him talk. He knew why Johnny was criticizing. It was because he could not be one himself. So, he had not seen Scylla since late in June. Thus far, she had never once come to the Observer's office in Salt Lane. It was as if she recognized it as that other world into which Johnny Tremain had disappeared and knew that she could not follow him. So Johnny was surprised one afternoon riding back from Plymouth, where he had delivered a letter for Major Pitcairn, to find her sitting in the shop with Rab. What? She went to the shop. She did not look at all forlorn, in her fresh lavender muslin frock, her neat white stockings and black pumps. Her head was tipped back, and she was laughing. She had been drawing a picture, and Rab was telling her what to draw. For once, for the first time since Johnny had left the Laphams, Isana was not with her. Johnny was so glad to see her. He wondered, could it have been that it was Isana always hanging on to her, always showing off, that had irritated him, made him not care whether he kept his rendezvous with the girls or not? As he came in, booted and spurred, sunburned and hatless, Scylla glanced at him. Her eyes were happy, filled to the brim with happiness. She had been having such a good time with Rab, and unconsciously and unreasonably, Johnny stiffened. He couldn't see why she and Rab should be having such a good time. Remember the dancing, the girls like him. They were explaining. Rab had wanted a picture of Boston being strangled to death by a British grenadier. It was for the newspaper, and she, Scylla, having chanced in, had drawn it beautifully. Now Johnny would have to cut a block of it for printing. I can do it, not very well, of course, but I can. You certainly can draw better and better. Mr. Tweedy can draw. He's giving me lessons. And Rab posed for the British grenadier. Look, I've pictures of him here. Those, Rab? They look more like woodchucks than Rab to me, he said. But Scylla knew he thought they were fine pictures and was proud of her. Remember, he insults when he is happy. She was so pretty. Johnny could hardly think where all this prettiness came from. And sourly, he thought it came from Rab. He had a way of lighting people up, showing them at their best. No, partly at least it was because of that lavender dress, and her face had color in it, because she was eating enough. When the troops came and times were so hard, Scylla had always given a large share of her food to Isana, and had grown to look more peaked and worried every week. Now she looked fine. Sit there like that, Johnny. I'm going to draw you too. You're easier than Rab. Why am I easier than Rab? Because, she said, intentionally hurting his feelings, you're just a child yet. Rab's grown up. There. You don't mind if I make you look a little like a raccoon, do you? I'll draw a bushy tail for you, Scylla, Rab said. Johnny fidgeted, as people do who are having their pictures drawn, crazy to see what somebody else thinks they look like. It wasn't much of a picture. Between them, they had drawn a funny half raccoon, half boy. Somehow, it did look like Johnny, and they all laughed. 4 o'clock. I must be getting back. I was told to pick up a pair of gloves on Queen Street and be back at 5. She got up, tied a flowered bonnet on her head, and started for the door. Wait, Scylla, you haven't told me any news. He had forgotten how recently her news had bored him. Oh, that's right. I've just told Rab, Johnny, I won't be able to meet you regularly any more. Things have changed. How so? Your mother mad? No, that is, yes, she is mad, but about something else. She's mad because Dorcas really did have the guts to run off and marry Frizzle Jr. just as soon as Mr. Tweedy declared for her. That means Mr. Tweedy said, okay, I'll take Dorcas as a wife. And she's like, oh, nope, I'm out of here. And she ran off and eloped. Dorcas isn't going to get much of that elegance she was always out after from Frizzle Jr. No, but she doesn't care. The young girl's voice softened. She says when you really are in love, you don't care much about anything except him. Johnny, remembering the gawky, callow, but upstanding young leather dresser of Fish Street, was surprised that anyone could value him so highly. She ran off with Frizzle Jr. just as soon as Mr. Tweedy came out and said he preferred her to Madge. But what put Ma right through the roof was when he said he was in no hurry. He didn't mind passing up Madge and waiting for me. You? Cried Johnny hotly. That old man, if he is a man. Why, he must be about 40, Scylla. You're lying to me if you say anybody's talking of marrying you. I was 15 last month, and you were 15 way back in January. I'd not stopped to think. Rab, did you hear that? I'm only a year younger than you are now. Rab grinned. I was 17 last week. Johnny thought that was like Rab, slipping off by himself, getting ahead of you, and then grinning at you out of the corner of his mouth, like it's his fault that it's his birthday. Mother didn't like it, Mr. Tweedy stalling like that. Then one thing happened after another. For instance, ever since, well, last fall, the lights have been giving us work to do. Mr. Tweedy is clever, although so queer. A couple of weeks ago, Miss Light came in. She wanted her arms, that old rising sun, engraved on the top of her riding whip. So she stands about, and I stand about, and Mr. Tweedy and Ma. The shop door was open into the backyard, and Isana was standing about too in the backyard. I'll bet she was. Yes, Miss Lavinia just about had a fit. What was Isana doing? Throwing up? I had just washed her hair, Scylla said dreamily, and the sun was on it. Oh, I see, said Johnny sourly. And Isana was walking back and forth reciting some poetry to herself, acting it out. Something about Captain Kidd and how he sailed. Old Stumpy Joe, the one-legged sailor man, taught it to her. Miss Lavinia stood there watching Isana, and she looked more like something cut out of stone than a human being. She can't help it, said Johnny, who liked to run her down. She was born that way. Go on. She just turned her head like that and said to Ma through her teeth like this, Ma'am, I'm taking that child with me. Ma first said she wouldn't, and then she said she couldn't stand between Isana and such an opportunity. And Isana said she wouldn't go without me, so it was fixed this way. I'm signed up to work in the kitchen or help Miss Lavinia dress or anything for a year, and Isana is thrown in for nothing because she is so young and has a delicate stomach. We are both living with the lights. Dun, dun, dun. Do you like her? Sometimes. Well, yes. Well, I think she's disagreeable. He hoped Scylla would contradict him, but she did not. So now I'll be going back. She only gave me the afternoon off. I thought I'd tell you not to look for me around North Square anymore. Johnny felt guilty. I do leave a paper at the lights every Thursday. Scylla said nothing, but looked at him out of the corners of her eyes. Couldn't I see you sometime, maybe? I don't know. You might ask Mrs. Bessie, the cook. She's sort of a friend of mine. So goodbye. I'll be going on. Scylla had changed so much, Johnny felt confused. One thing was certain. She wasn't going to hang around and wait for him either on street corners or at back doors, and then not have him show up. Goodbye, Scylla. I'll see you soon. But Rab did not say goodbye. He did not even ask her if he might walk home with her to Beacon Hill. He simply went. And Johnny was mad. If anyone walked home with Scylla, it should be himself. Or Rab might have said, Come on, Johnny, we'll both walk over to the lights with Scylla. But he'd forgive Rab for intruding himself. He'd cook up a mess of eggs for supper. It would take about 15 minutes to go to the lights, 15 minutes to get back. He built the fire and cooked the eggs. He cooked them and cooked them. At last, in disgust, he took them off and ate them, every now and then going down to consult the shop clock. Rab was gone for exactly 1 hour and 47 minutes. Nor did he miss the eggs Johnny had eaten. He had been very well fed by Mrs. Bessie in the light kitchen, and he thought Scylla was a grand kid. He had had a good time. You could see it in his eyes, and whenever he looked at Johnny's long face, he looked ready to laugh. That is the end of section 2. Click subscribe and find out what happens next time.